I wanted to welcome everybody. First of all, this is being recorded, and that will be great because then people who couldn't attend tonight and are interested will be able to hear it also. This is our first KMA virtual event. We had a lot of speaker series and other events planned. They all got canceled, so this is our first attempt to do a virtual meeting. I'm really thrilled about it. It's a hard adjustment, but this is really great. Our president, Jen Solt, couldn't be here tonight, so I have the honor of introducing our speaker tonight, Cleopatra Tuday. She's a biologist with the San Mateo County Resource Conservation District. This meeting had been scheduled for early March, and the weeds she's going to talk about have had a good chance to get a toehold in the last couple months, 3 months. So Cleopatra's focus is several invasive weeds that have really taken a hold on Kings Mountain. But also I want to assure all of you that if you have other questions when we get to the Q&A about other invasive weeds or other areas of concern, she's happy to answer those questions. Cleopatra will do a slide presentation, and then we'll do a Q&A. We're all on mute, and I'm going to go on mute as soon as this gets started. I think most of you are familiar, as we're all learning, that there's a chat icon, and what you can do is type in that you have a question, even if it's during the slide presentation, I think, and then that question would be addressed. And if for any reason you're unable to get your question, Cleopatra is totally available after the meeting. So I think that's all I want to say, is that I'm really happy everybody's here, and it's my pleasure to introduce Cleopatra, and now I am going to go on mute.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Yeah, just as a forward, do make sure that you are on mute. I see most of you are on mute, so just make sure that little icon's pressed so you have the kind of mute button on. Just so, you know, if anyone's dog starts barking, your kid starts screaming, it's not interrupting the presentation. Okay, and then I'm going to be screen sharing with everybody. Okay. All right, so to introduce myself, my name is Cleopatra Tuday. I'm a biologist with the San Mateo Resource Conservation District. And I have had the pleasure of being invited to come talk to you all about some of the invasive weeds that you guys have in your neighborhood that are actually very unique to your neighborhood, which may or may not be a good thing. So to give you an overview of who I am and who I work for, so I work for the San Mateo Resource Conservation District. We've been around since 1939. We were initially created in the beginnings of the Dust Bowl period as a soil conservation district to help farmers conserve their soil. Since then, we have proliferated into a number of other different natural resource management needs. We are a free we work on we are a local conservation district, so we're a local kind of government / nonprofit entity, and we provide free, confidential, non-regulatory technical assistance. We also provide educational assistance and financial assistance. We're very boots on the ground people, and we like to find grants and get money in order to do projects in our local area. And so we operate under a few different categories. We've now expanded from being just soil conservation to a resource conservation district. So we work a lot on water, so that's water quality, water security for farms and people. We work on climate change, so we do carbon farming programs, we do sea rise level studies, and we do a lot of outreach in terms of how we're going to fight climate change in the future. We work on working with wildlife, which is a lot of what I do. So that's anything from invasive weeds to working with endangered species to doing habitat restoration. We also work a lot with agriculture again, on kind of this carbon farm plan. So it's kind of a dual of working in climate change and working with farms. We also have our ag ombudsman on staff, who's a wonderful individual who assists farmers getting the permits that they need to do their work, getting that done, which is awesome. And lastly, which is a new one, fire. Fire is a huge issue, which affects all of the other topics that we cover. So we're working a lot on forest health and fuel reduction, which falls under that fire category. So we do a lot at the RCD, but today we're going to just talk about kind of in the wildlife category, we're going to talk about invasive weeds. So I first wanted to start by kind of the why of why we want to deal with weeds. Why are weeds such a topic we should be concerned about? And it really comes down to that we live in a really amazing area. San Mateo County is just filled with life. We have a high amount of biodiversity, a ton of endangered and rare plants and animals in our area, and a really wide variety of different habitats, anywhere from the coast to the redwood forest to baylands. So there's really a lot of amazing things that we want to make sure that we are protecting, especially since we are also in a very highly developed area. So got a number of wonderful things that I've found while out in the forest, including some albino redwoods and orchids, and some asters. Really beautiful. And the ecosystem, more than being just beautiful and intrinsically amazing, also gives a number of different resources. We depend a lot on our natural ecosystem, whether that's for clean air, clean water, aesthetic purposes, food, a lot of different things. So with that, we want to make sure that we are protecting our ecosystem, making sure that we're good stewards of the landscape. And in order to do that, we kind of have to understand what are the threats to our ecosystems that help support us. So there's a number of different things. Development is a huge one in this area. Climate change is another one that's a very huge one coming up. Disease, that can be disease with animals, disease with people, disease with plants. And then lastly, the one I'm going to be talking about is pest invasion. So that is when a plant is kind of introduced to an area in which it lacks predators and is able to thrive in a foreign environment. So it's generally non-native species, but we also have some native species which have kind of taken a foothold and gone a little crazy because a lot of the old processes that used to keep it in check no longer exist. So it's not just non-native species. We also have some native species that we are now considering pests. So it's all about kind of thinking of why. So in dealing with what I'm going to be calling invasive species, we don't rely on one single method to remove them. We rely on a tool belt, which is a method called the integrated pest management. And so that's thinking about all the different ways that we can help prevent and remove and eradicate invasive species. So that's anywhere from going out and hand pulling stuff, mowing, using grazing animals, using herbicides, using fire. But then also what I think is probably one of the best ways we can combat invasive species is prevention. And that's making sure that we don't get invasive species in the first place. So there's some really awesome kind of programs out there that's like Don't Plant a Pest through CalIPSI, which is the California Invasive Plant Council, who helps you not plant invasive plants in your yard and gives you some great alternatives. That's also something that I focus on, is thinking about how do we prevent getting invasive species in our area, and how do we stop invasive species that have just come into our area, which is why I'm going to be talking about these two species. So like to introduce our culprits, we have hanging sedge and slender false brome. These are two species that I focus on for my project, and these are two species that are really constricted in San Mateo County, and even within all of California. So I'm focusing on these two species for my program, and you may or may not have seen them while walking about in the Kings Mountain area. I'm going into a little bit about who this species is and how you can identify it if you're ever walking about. So hanging sedge is a sedge, which is a grass-like species, but it's not quite a grass. It really loves being in moist soils and even in creek systems. So you can see it a lot in riparian habitat where you've got a lot of trees and shrubs, a beautiful creek, and you can see some hanging sedge just kind of right there. You can also see it in someone's backyard in Kings Mountain area where there's some moisture in the soil. It is a very large plant. Despite the pictures don't particularly do it justice. You know, I have this wonderful picture of this botanist over here who's hanging out with the hanging sedge, and you can see that it's kind of towering above her. So it can be a fairly large plant. Generally, it's 1 meter in height, but then with the flowers, it can get up to 3 meters. So it can be pretty big, and it can get very dense. And the reason why we're concerned about this plant is because it takes up valuable habitat that would otherwise benefit sensitive species like fish and other wildlife and other plants. So this is something that we're concerned about. And the reason why we're targeting hanging sedge is because it's very restricted. And so we actually have a really good chance to control, if not eradicate, the species, at least within San Mateo County. So I have a map here that shows hanging sedge on the left. And so all those little blue dots is where we have found hanging sedge throughout the state of California. And on the right, just kind of as a comparison, we have French broom, which I'm sure you guys have heard of. It's a horrible, noxious weed that lasts forever, and it's a super bad fire problem. And you can see all the dots in blue and all the red squares is where they have found French broom in the state of California. So you can really see the visual difference in terms of, you know, if we're thinking about containing, eradicating, managing species, it's so much easier to do it when there's only a few locations versus when it's completely over the state and completely out of control. So this is really why I'm focusing on these species, is because we have a chance to do something and really make a big impact. So zooming into San Mateo County, even more so, we see that all the purple and pink and kind of green dots that you see on this map are all locations where we have found hanging sedge. This isn't a full picture. We're still doing surveys and we're still reaching out to landowners and homeowners to figure out where everything is. But this gives us a pretty good idea of where it is, and it's really only within the Purísima Creek watershed. So that's within Purísima Creek itself. You see a lot of mapping has been done within the Purísima Creek Open Space Preserve that's owned by Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space. And then you can see some along Skyline within the Kings Mountain area, which is why I'm talking to you guys today. Yeah, so we have an amazing chance to just focus on one watershed and one creek to do this invasive species work versus if it was completely everywhere within the county. So that's kind of why I wanted to show you guys these maps. And so now to turn you guys into professional botanists, I'm going to go over a little bit of some of the physical characteristics of hanging sedge, just to prime you guys. So when you're out and you're walking about and you're in your yard because you're working from home or you're taking your dog on a walk, you can kind of keep an eye out and think about, you know, these characteristics that I've shown you and see if you guys can find it in your neighborhood or in your yard, and you can come reach out to me. So hanging sedge, like I said, first things first is it's really big. So if you're thinking like the size of a dog, or you know, if you're thinking of irises can look very similar, this is much bigger than an iris. Another really key characteristic is it has these really tall and then really long flowers that are kind of pencil shaped and pencil length. That's very unique to this sedge. We have some native sedges in our area that can look very similar, but they're not going to be this size and they're not going to have those really long flowers. I know they're not very typical flowers that you're used to, but we still call them flowers. Another thing is that if you take a leaf and you cut it and you look at it in cross section, you're going to notice that it has a bit of a W shape to it versus some other plants like irises or jubata grass, where it's just going to be a very flat leaf. So that's another really good indicator that you're dealing with the sedge. And then another good indicator is if you kind of look at the very bottom of the plant, or you end up pulling it out, and you look just above the roots, you're going to notice a little bit of red coloring. Not sure why that's there, but it's a good key indicator. When I'm doing identification in the field, I use more of a checklist than a specific characteristic to let me know what I'm looking at. Just some pro tips from a botanist. So removal methods. So if you do find it in your yard, I hope the first thing is that you reach out to me. Even if you are a total DIY person and want to tackle it on your own, letting me know that you have it in your yard and you're dealing with it really, really helps me have an idea of what's happening in our county, because we're trying to be so targeted with this. It's just good to have that data for me. So if you do end up wanting to remove it on your own, there's a few things that you can do. The first thing you can do is you can dig it out. That's kind of the best method. It's not easy because they are so large. So generally, if you have like a large spade's foot shovel, maybe like a pick or something like that to really hack at it, you can see some AmeriCorps volunteers that I worked with back in March. It took 3 of them to dig this giant hanging sedge out, all using shovels. And when you dig it up, I would recommend that you flip it upside down and just kind of let it dry out and keep it away from moisture. There's no need to really put it in your compost or put it in the trash. I'd actually recommend you not put it in your compost or your green waste, just in case it ends up taking root somewhere else. We really want to make sure that where we find it is where we leave it, because the name of the game here is to make sure we're not spreading it elsewhere in the county. Another thing you can do if you don't quite have the strength to pull it out, but maybe you don't have enough time to reach out to me or anything, is you can clip the seed heads, and you can either double bag those seed heads and put them in the trash, or you can just clip them and kind of bury them within the plant itself and kind of leave it on site. The reason why I recommend to leave it on site again is so we're not spreading it. So if you end up throwing in the trash willy-nilly and then trash flies off from the truck and then it spreads elsewhere, then we have a whole new population we have to deal with. So it's generally why I suggest you leave it on site, but if you have to, you can double bag it and throw it in the trash. You can also hand pull seedlings while they're small. I would recommend to do this instead of having to deal with the adults, because the adults are really hard to remove. But even small, they can be a little bit of a difficulty to remove. So you can use things like weed wrenches or spades or shovels to kind of dig them up. Do be careful when you are kind of exposing the soil, though, that you're not causing any soil erosion. Usually if you just throw some leaf litter on top, you're fine. And then for hanging sedge, some people would rather use herbicides. I would not recommend using herbicides for hanging sedge, just because it's so often really close to a water resource where there's a sensitive aquatic species. So we just want to be good land managers, and if we're using chemicals, we know where we're putting them, and we're not putting them near water systems. Cool. So our next species is slender false brome. This one is a little bit more of a tricky species to find and see, just because it's a grass and it looks a lot like every other grass. And unless you're a botanist like me or one of my crew who I've trained, it can be a little difficult. But again, this is just to prime you and to keep you aware and keep your eyes open. So slender false brome is a grass species. It is very unique in terms of being a grass species because it can deal with either the sun or the shade. Often I find it in like dense redwood forest where there's some dappled sunlight and it's really beautiful, and then there's some slender false brome right there. And because it's a grass, it produces a lot of seeds and it spreads really easily. And that's really unfortunate because it's really good at creating large culture stands. So you see on the picture on the right, I have an infestation that I've been treating out in Woodside, where it's basically turned into a giant lawn, and it's kicking out a lot of really amazing redwood species that could otherwise be growing there. There's also a very similar infestation in Oregon where it's taken over 10,000 acres. Here in California, and more specifically San Mateo County, we're estimating that it's more like 300 acres as an infestation. So there's a big difference there. And, you know, as you can see from the pictures, it can be pretty nasty if we let it sit. And then it's also noxious to grazing animals. For the most part, animals aren't particularly grazing on it, so you're not going to see a lot of deer browsing or, you know, goats or cows or anything. Though I do have some customers who have noticed that their dogs really like chewing on it. Don't know why. And according to the California Department of Food and Agriculture, it's considered a Class A noxious weed, which means it's kind of on the top of their to-do list to get rid of. So geographically, again, I'm showing that comparison maps. On the left, we have slender false brome. Slender false brome is really only found in San Mateo County and a little bit in Santa Cruz County, and maybe like one population in Santa Clara County. So this is really geographically restricted within the state of California. So we have a really good opportunity to kind of like keep it where it is. Unfortunately, though, it is fairly widespread where we have found it, which kind of creates a very large challenge for us in terms of figuring out if we can eradicate it, contain it, or just manage it. So right now, at least for slender false brome, we're looking at least containing it, if not just managing it. We would be dealing with over 300 landowners if we decided we want to try to eradicate it. In all honesty, I don't think it's going to work. But I think we do have a really good chance to at least contain it and to keep it where it is so it's not spreading to the rest of the state of California and threatening other redwood forests. So as you can see, I have a little arrow showing Kings Mountain. You guys are the northernmost population of slender false brome within the state of San Mateo County and potentially within, within San Mateo County and potentially within the state of California. So it's a really high priority for me to make sure when I find populations within Kings Mountain that we are targeting them and getting rid of them because you guys are the defense line for the northern spread of slender false brome. So if you do feel like you are comfortable with identifying the species, some people really on and quickly find it. Other people, it takes them forever and they're never able to like figure out what the difference is between slender false brome and any other normal grass. So I'm just going to go through a few pictures. Again, this is just to kind of prime your brain into thinking about these things. So slender false brome is a bunch grass. So that means that you have all these leaves coming from a central point versus like a lawn, which kind of spreads around and you have all these kind of crawling stems. This guy is a nice little dollop of a plant and kind of fountains out. So it's actually fairly beautiful, which is very important. Another unique characteristic is that it has these very sparse, delicate hairs that kind of crawl up the stem and are also just on the edges of the leaf. So if you ever are around and you like pulling up grass or something, if you ever pull out a leaf of a slender false brome and you hold it up to the sky, you can kind of see these hairs just on the edge of the leaf versus it just being completely smooth or it being completely fuzzy. So very interesting light hairiness. The most unique part of this plant are the flowers or the seed heads. Unfortunately, you have to be a bit of a botanist to kind of get it, but hopefully my little pictures here help out with identification. So if you ever are walking around and you see all these grass flowers, you can kind of just, do some botanizing. So for slender false brome, the seed heads or the flowers come directly off of the main stem of the grass. So I have my little diagram here. So on the left-hand side, we have kind of a Christmas tree shaped grass stalk. And so you have, a main stem and you have some kind of auxiliary stems that come off and you have the seed heads that are there. So that's kind of like a normal grass that you would find in the forest versus slender false brome, which is on the right, which is kind of this long stem, and then the seed heads come directly off of that main stem. So it kind of has like this ladder fence feel to it. So that's kind of the most unique. If I'm out in the field and I'm having trouble looking at the leaves or the characteristic of it, I try to look for the flowers. And for me, that's a yes or a no question. Another thing to look out for is that it just has these really beautiful, bright green and glossy leaves. It kind of like has a little shine to them. So that's just kind of like a artistic interpretation of plant identification. But for me, it's really helpful. So if you do have slender false brome on your property, or end up helping a neighbor pull out their slender false brome, there's a few different things that you can do, and it really depends also on how much of it you have. Some folks have like 2 plants, and if you have 2 plants, I would really recommend just going out and just pulling it out with your hands or using a spade to pull it out. They're pretty easy to pull out. They have fairly shallow root systems, but just make sure that when you are pulling it, you're getting the whole plant, including the roots. You don't have to get every single root, but making sure you really get like the root crown out of there. You can also mow. I don't particularly recommend this. This is just kind of a remedy to keep it at bay, but it is not going to get rid of it because slender false brome actually lives for more than 1 year versus some grasses that only live for 1 year. So mowing doesn't particularly help, but in a pinch, it's okay. What I would recommend if you do feel like mowing is following that up with covering up these slender false brome patches with mulch or cardboard or thick plastic. That way you're actually smothering out both the plants that are there and the seeds that are in the soil in that area. Also gives you an opportunity to do some really nice landscaping. And then if you are thinking about using chemicals or using herbicides, I would recommend a grass or broad spectrum herbicide. That being said, please follow label directions. Please use it with caution. Make sure that you're protecting both yourself and the environment. And then you're not using herbicides near any water source. So if you have a creek or like a pond, that you're not using it near those, just because there could be some critters that are very sensitive to herbicides. So with that, kind of on the broader end of things, dealing with weeds is not just a problem for public lands or for county ag to deal with or for the RCD to deal with. It's kind of a problem with everybody. So, I'm always looking for people to kind of provide me help. And that's in the form of being able to volunteer your land and letting me come onto your property to do surveys. That's probably the best thing you can do to help prevent the spread of these 2 species in our county and in our state. So I just have a nice lovely picture of some AmeriCorps volunteers that came in March, an awesome group of folks, really awesome young people that came out and worked really hard. So hoping they can be a good example of what we can all do. So with the RCD, we have a program to help you guys get rid of these 2 invasive species. So it's a bit of a give and take. You volunteer your land and I give you as many resources as I humanly can. So it's a yearly program. So generally what we do is we engage with the property owner. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm talking to you guys, and hopefully you'll reach out to me. And so we kind of go in a back and forth in terms of, what you're looking for, who you are, who I am. And then once we kind of have that established and, you're in the right area, then, I will schedule, me or my assistant will schedule to come out to do a survey. So we usually pick a day, we come out, we walk around the property either with you or without you, depends on your preference. And it usually takes us between 15 minutes to an hour, depending on the size of your property. If you have a giant property, it might take us a couple of hours. If you have a small 1/4 acre house, it might take us like 15 minutes to walk around. And we basically map anything that we find. If we don't find anything, we kind of, say a little hurrah, and also take down those notes. And then once we finished our survey, we kind of come up with a prescription in terms of treatment. So if you do have invasive species on your property, I'm going to recommend a few different things. We provide free professional help to do this work. There's some awesome contractors that are specifically geared towards dealing with invasive weeds in natural landscapes and wilderness landscapes. So this is really their bread and butter. versus having like a gardener come do it. So these guys really know what they're looking for. They really know what they're doing. They're also really awesome. Or if you are a DIY person, you can do it yourself. We do offer a reimbursement at $415 per acre. That being said, you know, I have to come out and do a survey, and then I let you know like how many acres you have, and we kind of do back and forth. So that's up to you. If you end up having a really huge infestation and you want to tackle it on your own, I'd be happy to work with you to figure out reimbursement on how we can kind of help pay for your time and some of the materials. Yeah, so we come and we schedule either a day for our crews to come out and treat your property, or you let me know when you're going to treat your property, and then following that treatment day, 1 to 2 months later, I'll come back out and reassess the property just to make sure that everything's done, or if there's any ceilings that we need to follow up on. That really helps kind of make our treatment efficient. So, and then, you know, we wait until the next year and we come contact you guys again, generally in the springtime. Unfortunately, the COVID pandemic came right in the middle of when we want to be surveying and treating. So we're going to be extending our treatment season into summer this year. We generally want it to be closer to like spring and early summer. But thankfully, both of these plants live throughout the season, so we can kind of take our time and get to them when we need to, but we're just kind of fighting the seeds now. Yeah, so this is a yearly program that I work on, so you guys can always reach out to me at any time of the year, and we can work together on managing the weeds on your property. Yeah, so I wanted to just let you guys know other ways that you can help deal with these invasive species in the Kings Mountain area. First thing, like I've been saying, is you can reach out to me and schedule a time for me to come survey, or for me to schedule my crews to come out and treat all the invasive species on your property. You can be just eyes on the ground for me, so you can walk around in your neighborhood, make some observations. There's some really cool apps out online like CalFlora or iNaturalist. We can kind of run around, take pictures of plants, and some of the apps will also just identify the plant for you, which is really cool. And you know, you can always just email me with pictures and be like, what is this? I've definitely had people do that, and I really love when people do that. You know, and I can just let you know yes or no, or ask you to take more pictures. It's fun. Another thing you can do is volunteer your time or volunteer your land. So volunteering your time either helping a neighbor pull out invasive weeds, so that can be, you know, my 2 target species that I'm looking for, or any other invasive weeds like French broom or English ivy or Cape ivy or any of the other things that are out there. Or you can volunteer at a local park. So Mid-Peninsula Open Space District has a very robust volunteer program, as does county parks or state parks. All of them have invasive species, and they can all use volunteers. And I think now that, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic we're introducing more, you know, even with social distancing, people are allowing more volunteer opportunities to happen. So now might be a good time to go out and about and explore nature. And you can also volunteer your land. So that's what my program is looking for, is for you to volunteer your land so I can come out, survey, treat, and follow up with you. Yeah, so that's the presentation. I'm going to open up to questions. I didn't get any questions in the comment or in the chat feed, but you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question. And you can feel free to reach out to me at any point in time. I have my email up on the screen. My email, if you let Betsy know, she has my contact information as well. So reach out to me anytime. You can also check out the San Mateo Resource Conservation District website. We do a lot of other really awesome things in our county. So I definitely recommend you check some of those out. Okay, questions? Okay, got one question. What's the most effective way to get rid of English ivy? Well, so English ivy is a pretty tricky one. It's going to depend on how big your infestation, or how big of a population you're dealing with. So if you just have like small seedlings here and there, you can just hand pull those. But for the most part, what I've seen in like people's yards is those big giant swaths of English ivy, which are pretty tricky to get rid of. And it can be pretty intensive as well. So, I mean, there's the option of just digging it out. I really wouldn't recommend that if you have a very large population of it. There are, you know, herbicides that you can use. There's broad spectrum herbicides. I would definitely talk to a landscaping company, maybe not doing that DIY. Another thing you can do just to keep it at bay as well, especially if you don't have a lot of time or resources to dedicate to getting rid of English ivy, is kind of take it section by section. So like working on the boundary of your English ivy, or trying to conserve specific trees that are being kind of where the English ivy is climbing up. So making sure you're cutting those vines, taking those down, and then kind of trimming the edges of the English ivy just to kind of keep it at bay. Those are some things that you can do. It's a very tricky plant, which is why it's so successful in our area. Okay, how bad is the star thistle infestation? I'm fighting a constant war on this. Ooh, star thistles. Star thistles are fairly common throughout the state of California, unfortunately, and are a huge issue. For the most part, the best thing you can do is really be on top of the infestation that you have on your property. There's not much you can do about seed sources coming in because it is wind dispersed. But I would recommend either, if you have a small infestation, hand pulling it before it starts blooming. So if you notice like little flower buds coming up, making sure you pull it out before it does that, and then either hiding those in a really shady spot, apparently that works pretty well to suppress germination, or double bagging it and throwing it in the trash. If you pull it up while it's blooming, or even while it's in bud, sometimes thistle species, if you just throw them on the ground, will continue to mature and flower and go to seed, which is a really weird, amazing trait that thistles can do. You can also, if you have like a big infestation, you can also try mowing when you see like a 5% bloom within your thistle patch. And if you're on top of that every year, that might be able to help. Again, a lot of this depends on how big your infestation is and, you know, what you're trying to preserve. Any other questions? Folks can also unmute themselves too.
I have a question. Will you have work crews coming up to work on some of those really big patches of the hanging sedge, the ones that are really hard to get out and aren't on anybody's property necessarily, that are just out there?
So for those large infestations, we try to find the landowner to work with them. So if we don't know who the landowner is, we unfortunately just don't particularly deal with it, because we want to make sure that we are working with the landowner. That being said, we're pretty good at finding out who owns what. So if there's kind of like a random big patch somewhere, someone does own that property, you know, sometimes you kind of have like your house, your yard, and then you kind of own some random strip of wilderness, and they're generally kind of on that random strip of wilderness. So yeah, generally it's going to be owned by somebody, and we'd be happy to send our crews out to deal with, especially those really big populations. That's what the crews are for. Yeah, and the crews are free. Yeah. Does anybody else have a question? Okay.
Will you be sending out, or Betsy, I don't know whom, would be sending out sort of a summary of what was said tonight and contact information, so those who haven't seen this will have an opportunity to contact someone if they think they have an infestation of either one of these invasives?
Yeah, I think what KMA can do, and I can do this, is send something out. And Cleopatra, is there a way we can link? Maybe if you can let me know how people can link to this presentation, but also a summary of what we covered tonight, because I know it affects a fairly small. It's maybe what, about 1.5 miles along Skyline, but I think everybody's very curious about it, so, and wants to get rid of it. So we'll follow. KMA will follow up on this for sure.
Okay. Super, Betsy. Thanks.
Yeah, and then this meeting's being recorded, so if anyone came in late, or if there's someone who's really interested but couldn't attend, I'm going to give Betsy the recording of the presentation, and then I'm also going to see if we can post it on the San Mateo Resource Conservation District website. I also, if you open up the chat feed, I also have my my emails in there as well. So it's a few different ways. Yeah, so I'd happy to give any information anyone needs.
Great.
And then it looks like someone has one more question in the chat feed. Do you go onto Mid-Penn's property to remove noxious weeds, or do they do that themselves? If we see it on their preserve, should we contact you? Yeah, so this program that I work on is actually funded by Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. And so we are kind of doing this as a partnership. So they take care of the invasive species on their property, and then we kind of work on coordinating with private landowners. So there's kind of a comprehensive landscape scale kind of weed removal effort, which is why this program's so cool, is because everyone's kind of into it. So they are removing those invasive species on their property. They have priority lists, so if you're thinking of a particular noxious weed, they might not get to it versus some other ones like hanging sedge or slender false brome, which are kind of on their high priority list. If you do see it on your on their preserves and it hasn't been dealt with, yeah, you can reach out to me. You can also email them as well, but sometimes they have a lot of emails. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me. You can also try to make observations on those apps like iNaturalist. I know Mid-Penn, they tend to scope iNaturalist a lot, just because people are out there making observations that they might not be able to make. So they really use that citizen science to help manage their landscapes. And then I got another question. It says, does your program also cover English? Unfortunately, no, we don't cover English ivy in our program. Hopefully you saw some of those comparison maps that I had earlier in the presentation where, if we look at English ivy, which is a very common weed throughout the state of California, it is thoroughly throughout the state of California. So in terms of, making a big impact, being able to, having a program that treats English ivy isn't particularly gonna, you're not gonna say so which is why we focus on both hanging sedge and slender false brome, because they're so restricted. There's actually an opportunity to make a difference versus if we tried doing with English ivy. That being said, if you want me to come out and talk to you about English ivy and different ways that you can remove it, I'd be happy to talk to you. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. I think we learned a lot.
Yes, thank you.
It was a really excellent presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, good.
And thank everybody who got on Zoom tonight and came to the KMA's first virtual meeting. And maybe this will be the first of more. I hope so.
Well, thank you for organizing it, Betsy.
Yeah. Well, Cleopatra made it very easy, so I really appreciate that. Yeah. All right, so should we say our goodbyes now and our final thanks? Any final thoughts?
No, yeah, if you have any questions, or if you weren't able to get my contact information from this call, Betsy, if I could rely on you to
absolutely
have everyone you can forward everything to me, and I'd be happy to talk to folks. I'm also, just to remind you guys, I am a biologist, so I do more than just dealing with 2 species of weeds. I do a lot more around like the species and other biologically related needs. So if you have any other questions, you can also reach out to me about those.
Okay.
All right. All right, well, thank you. And
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
see you guys later. Hope
maybe we should all unmute and applause.
Hey.
Thank you.
All right, goodbye, everybody.
Bye,
And thank you.
everybody.
Bye.